I'm Dr. Alvin Thomas. My work and this show is dedicated to educating, validating, elevating, and celebrating the importance of Black fatherhood. This is the Black Fatherhood Podcast. Today we're talking about how Black men are affected by the social welfare system and the challenges that impede their ability to attain economic security, including their ability to be gainfully employed, engage with their children, and sustain a good quality of life. Our guest is Dr. David Pate, Jr. Dr. Pate is a visiting associate professor in the School of Human Ecology, Department of Human Development and Family Studies, and Consumer Science, and an associate professor and chair emeritus of the Social Work Department at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Helen Bader School of Social Welfare. His research involves examining the effects of social welfare policy on the life course events of Black adult males, the social and economic determinants of poverty for Black males, including variables such as involvement with the Child Support Services Program, legal barriers, and previous traumatic experiences that may affect their adult well-being. Welcome, Dr. Pate.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here.
You study specifically the challenges that Black men and Black fathers face in their ability to attain economic security. What first got you into this field?
Well, and again, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. My first area of work was as a social worker, where I provided direct services to predominantly Black males of all ages. Particularly, my very first job was working with Black men, Black young adolescents whom were receiving services at a hospital in terms of their mothers of their children were having babies. They were both teenage parents, and I became very intrigued about how do young adults at this age navigate parenthood and how they navigate the legal system and how they navigate their parentage or legal parentage. And from there, I had a series of jobs. And I have to say the job that really convinced me to do the work I'm doing now was when I discovered something called the Bastard Court in Chicago, which was a space where people who were having children out of wedlock would go to have their paternity established. And I was intrigued by this term bastard for a parentage space that was legal in the basement of a police station in Chicago. But I was also very intrigued by how do people become parents legally and allows them to have legal rights to their children, which was my project I was doing in the state of Illinois. That particular discovery led me to sue the state of Illinois. I sued the state of Illinois to say that this seemed unfair. It was very much targeted to those who were marginalized and minoritized. And I wanted to figure out how do we provide a safer space for them to engage in their parentage, but also a more humane space to engage in their parentage.
So I know you do a lot of you've done a lot of research over the decades, just really influential research in the social workspace and in the social policy space, and you're very well known for this research. But maybe you could tell us about one of your more recent projects, and as you tell us about this project, help us understand how you conduct your research and what does that look like to do that research.
Well, yes. Well, my research methodology is qualitative in terms of more of an ethnography, where I really look and examine the space, the gender issues, the economic issues. I look at all the things that are affecting that particular phenomena that I'm trying to understand. How does it affect this person's ability to function in the world? How does it affect their ability to be someone who's fully engaged with their children, but also fully engaged with the society in a way that they're able to work, that they're able to pay their bills, that they're able to live in a decent space, that they're able to engage with the partner of their children. And so when I look at those particular variables, what I do is I listen to music. I go and observe environments. I'll sit at a local bar. I'll sit in barbershops for days, just listen to people talk. Now, of course, I have no hair to get cut, so it looks kind of suspicious when I'm there very long. But I let people know I'm just trying to understand what is some of the things that are going on in the community that help me understand how to be a better researcher. And because I've been in the same space for over 25 plus years, many people know me just because they know me as someone who's a researcher, and they've seen me in the newspaper or on TV. Or at one point, I had my own NPR show that focused on
Mm.
Black men nationally, and what are some of the issues that really impede their ability to be involved with their children. So I really tried to do my best to understand what's the environmental understanding of issues of Black men who are poor, but also who are engaged in the system of trying, particularly the system of child support, which has been my primary area of study. In my most recent work, I'm looking at men who are coming out of prison. They may be
Mhm.
fathers, they may not be, and I'm trying to understand how they are able to navigate a system that they may be unfamiliar with because they've been in prison for 10 years or more. I'm also trying to understand in another project where I'm giving, right now, I have a major project in the city of Philadelphia where I'm giving out $500 to 51 families every month for
Mhm.
12 months, and that's coming to an end. And I'm giving out to another group of families $50, and that's about 240 families. And I'm documenting with a colleague just what is some of the changes around their decision making, but also their well being. And we just recently found out that the money, whether it's $50 or 500, has it reduced their depression, has improved their well-being, has helped some of them graduate from college, has helped some of them pay down their bills, has helped some of them even improve their financial literacy, and that they give their children the money I give them, they give to their children as an allowance as they learn how to budget. So I'm looking very forward to documenting that study. But those are my two major studies right now. But my
Mm.
work is always focused on Black men and how are they seen as parents or even partners in families.
So this, I think the piece I got stuck on, and maybe some listeners might get stuck on. Did you say that there was no difference in the amount of impact, whether it was $50 or $500?
Well, of course, there's going to be some major impact for those who have 500 because they can pay down bills
Right.
more. And so the people who are graduating from college, like a college being a tech school or a training school, they can use that money for that reason. But the ones who have $50 have been the stories, the narratives, and I'm looking very much to being able to tell the stories I'm learning from these families, is that they're telling me that their sense of comfort around being able to have less stress on their children being better off is helping them.
Mhm.
And that's what we're seeing in our, not, it's not the changes from, we've now done 3 surveys, and from survey 1 to survey 3, the statistical significance, as they say in the
Mhm.
quantitative world, is apparent, but not as apparent in the $500 ones. But we're seeing some change between both groups.
And you're seeing change with regard to mental health as well. I think you mentioned
Yes,
depression.
yes, and that study is primarily looking at women. I do have a few men in that study, but I think for
Mm.
Black people across the board, and again, these families are their average income was $4,800, not 48,000. Their average income was $4,800 a year. This money is making a significant difference in some of their well-being, and that's what I was more concerned about, not how they spent the money, even though we know
Right.
that. I really was concerned about whether or not just a little bit of money can help someone be in a better space to take care of their children. And that's what I'm finding.
Wow.
Again, it's all
I like that you
preliminary. It's all preliminary now.
preliminary.
So,
I would love to talk to you a little bit more about this offline. But I do like the fact that you underscored that this is not 48,000. This is
yes,
$4,800 a
yes,
year in the U.S. There are families living on $4,800 a year. Well, not living. There are families earning $4,800 a year. So I
yeah,
know that you've primarily done work into low income families and how they're affected by family law and the legal system at large. Can you tell us a little bit about how this family centric legislation arises and how it affects low income Black men and fathers in particular?
Well, the social welfare system in general this is a really easy answer. Social welfare system in general is only for those who have children in their custody, primarily. So if you're someone who's poor and you have a child in your custody, you have access to Medicaid, you have access to TANF, you have access to other child care benefits. There's other benefits you have access to that allow you to parent because we have decided based on the 1601 the English Poor Laws from 1601. When people came to colonize this country, they brought those laws with them. The one thing about America too is that we also have a foundation of individualism and exceptionalism, and also the whole idea of being a meritocracy is very much a part of this society, where that if you work hard enough, you'll be successful, and that is true for some, but has not been true for many who have been somewhat marginalized and minoritized over 400 plus years of their life, who have been either brought in as a slavery economy, or those who were part of a genocide based on the fact that they were here. So for Black men, or for men, period, the social welfare system is only available in a sense when you are working. And working that you're contributing by paying taxes. Now, unfortunately, unemployment has been historically not very much present for those, has been very much present for those who are Black and brown. And for Black men in particular, Black families in general, not in general, it's documented. Black families have the lowest median income. Their median income is about $40,000 and has been always the lowest median income. And also because we tend to look at family and breadwinner as head of household being males, those men will make more money than the women, but they tend to also make less than their counterparts who are in the same situation. So for that reason, our society is based on men being in the family. There's not marriage is not something that is very much present within Black families. It's not something that I judge as a moral issue. It's just as something that families who are poor, if they are married and they make a certain amount of income, are not going to have access to certain programs because of their marital status. So there is a tax of some type on them. So I say all that to say that in general, our social welfare policies are meant for those with children, and children tend to be in households that tend to be mothers or those who identify as women. Who are taking care of the children and who have access to those benefits. The only time that we really engage those who identify as men or non-custodial parents is through the child support system. Or if men are incarcerated, that's when they have access to social welfare policy or social welfare systems. They have access to food, shelter, and clothing, and which is unfortunate. That's the one place that men do have access to services. But men don't have access to services generally because they don't have children in their custody. That's just the bottom line.
So it sounds like the bulk of the family-centered legislative interaction for men is around child support.
Yes.
And child support requirements.
Yes. Yes.
And break down that difference between custodial and non-custodial, and why that matters for child support.
Well, child support, I mean, it's a complicated and complex discussion. And again, I've studied this for 30 years, and I'll do my best to compact it
to put it down in 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes. Custodial simply means that you have the children in your legal custody. The way the laws work is that we know for certain that the child is the mother. The child belongs to the mother because the baby comes out of her. People witness that, and we know that's the one way a child comes here. We don't know by law who the father is unless the mother is married to the father. If she's not married to the father, then we have to go through paternity establishment. But those who are married, law is, if you're married, the assumption is that woman is only having sex with that person, that man. That's the way the law is. So for someone who's married, the father has automatic custody because they're married. There's a legal arrangement. But when there's no legal arrangement and you have someone who are two non-wedded partners get together and they have a child, then there has to be a procedure to decide who's the custodial and who's non-custodial. And those terms are very specific to custody of where the child is going to live. And if you're the non-custodial parent, because the child does not live with you, then you have the legal obligation to pay child support to that household. That's for everybody. But when you're in the social welfare system, like you receive a TANF check or a cash assistance check, then your legal responsibility is to the state. The state owns your child support, and the mother is required to name a father, or she does not get that child. She may not get that TANF. And those laws vary across the United States. In every state, and in Wisconsin, for example, we have 72 counties. There's 72 different child support programs.
Wow. Wow. This is, I could see why you studied this for more than 30 years, because it feels like you can't ever put your finger definitively on it. It almost feels like an elusive setup where you think you understand it in one county in Wisconsin, and you move to a different county, your partner moves to a different county, and suddenly the jurisdiction changes, and suddenly, of course, the interaction with the legal system changes. And if you move out of state, then that's a whole different ball game as well. And if you're an individual who's earning $4,800 a year, you don't have the time or the advocacy skills. You're less likely, I should say, to have the time or the advocacy skills to be able to learn these procedures and understand the legal ramifications.
You're exactly right.
That is.
So I did a good job. You got it. You got it really quickly. So that was good. I mean, again, and also there's an issue of discretion in this. Even though
Right.
there's federal law and there's state policy that legislate this, it's a federal-state relationship. There's still when I sit in courtrooms, for example, and that was part of my research too. I sit in courtrooms and I watch how judges make decisions depending on by gender and race, how they're going to make those decisions, and the various counties within the state of Wisconsin or in the country. That's also part of my work, where I do a lot of courtroom observation. If I can get access to the courtroom, which is a whole
Right.
nother conversation, because the majority of people going into these courtrooms are very poor, and the majority of people who go into these courtrooms are Black men. They bring men from prison to these courtrooms. Your child support order does not stop when you're incarcerated because it's seen as voluntary unemployment. That's a legal term. Some states have dropped that as a requirement, but many states have maintained that. So it's a much bigger discussion. I don't want to confuse your audience or even you, but
Wow.
I'm one of few Black academics who study this. And luckily, there's some up and coming scholars who I know at Yale and LSU and Duke and Wake Forest who are doing this work, and I'm very happy to have been a part of their mentoring. Very little, if any, but it's just good that someone is starting to see this. But it's also a very hard subject to study, but it needs to be because so many Black families are within this system and being affected.
So another area of specialty is social work reform. In that regard, what do you see as the biggest threat to Black fathers, and how can we fix it? Is it fixable?
I think the biggest threat is that we don't recognize Black fathers as parents. And I think that's an issue I've had with the social work profession, that we don't engage and discuss the role of fathers, but also the role of Black fathers. And I think because of stereotypical and discriminatory practices of how we view parenthood, we tend to see the parent only as the mother. And we don't see that there are fathers who are very engaged. That Black families in particular, in my opinion, are more willing to be equal in sharing of their custody of their children in a way that's informal. I think that unfortunately within the legal system, it causes more harm for Black families and particularly for poor Black families. But we need more academics and more people really speaking out, particularly social workers who have a lot of contact with families, to talk about the inequities that occur within these systems, particularly the social welfare system. Some states do a better job than others, of course. California does a really good job of looking at these issues. New York, but again, these are bigger cities, more liberal cities, where some don't do as great a job. Wisconsin, unfortunately, is one of the states where we don't have a Medicaid expansion, where Black men or men, period, are not able to get health care benefits, even though Badger Care is great. And we do provide some access. If we had taken the expansion money from the Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, that would have provided more access for men to health care. And unfortunately, Black men's health care is deteriorating. In fact, we're going backwards in our morbidity and mortality statistics for the first time in a long time. So there's issues of what we're ignoring around policy that need to be attended to, particularly as it pertains to men, but Black men in particular.
And so I think this discussion about policy that you're bringing up, I think we usually think of policy as just this thing that happens while we're alive or while we're in office or while we're occupying a particular space. But policy lives on. We're still dealing with Ronald Reagan, fallouts of the Ronald Reagan policy era. We're dealing with fallouts from the JFK policy era. There are policies from many, in fact, policies all the way back, if we use the Constitution as an overall understanding of policy, that's still having an effect on how we think and how we live and what we believe today. We talk about legacy in season 2 of this podcast. When you think about policy, you think about intergenerational trauma and how those can affect the next generation. What has your work taught you about that cycle of poverty and the influence of policy, if at all, on this group that you're studying?
Well, there was a really important study done by Raj Chetty. I think he's with Harvard now. He was at Stanford. And you may recall that study where they looked at families who were of equal incomes, higher incomes, and how black and white males were at the same level, but black males tend to continually fall within an impoverished status despite the same education, the same economic resources, and white young men from those same households rose to the top and either maintained where their parents are or did better. And some of that is the biggest issue I learned in some of my more recent work I did with the city of Milwaukee around looking at violence prevention, as for example, and also looking at doing some other work I was doing with someone, is this whole idea of the lack of a social network and the lack of a network that allows you to have the opportunities to access other ways of advancement. That's something that unfortunately many black and brown families do not have because they've been redlined in certain neighborhoods. They've been denied access to various institutions. They've been denied access to the same opportunities. There was a recent study that came out from the Economic Policy Institute that showed in given cities, if you were disabled, had been formerly incarcerated, had a lack of a high school degree, white men still did better than black men. Across just those 3 areas. So there is some foundational issues around what race means in this country, but also race just means racism because race was a socially constructed variable within our society or a phenomena, and people have ingrained within themselves that certain people of a certain distinctive race as defined by society are not acceptable to receive those same benefits. And so I think some of the traumatic experience also of slavery, the traumatic experience of the civil rights. I think that the way certain laws are being challenged around voting rights now, it comes down to how we view black and brown people. And we need to do a better job. We need to come to have a real, for lack of a better word, we need to have a come to Jesus discussion. I don't know if that's the right thing to say on your podcast, but we need that kind of discussion about what does race really mean. And some people should not be involved in this discussion. We need to have a real discussion around what are we going to do, because when one group of our society is doing poorly, we all suffer. We're not going to be in a better society until we all are doing or all have access to the same opportunities for our children as to be better off in terms of where they're going to be. So I think it's a time for those type of meetings, those type of discussions, but based on where we are as a society right now, unfortunately, they're not going to happen because we're really in a volatile space around our democracy and who we are as a country.
As you're talking, I'm hearing in just the instinctive, in some cases, dog whistle responses, and in some cases, just people who are trying to understand their responses. But black people have been in America for so long. Like, there are very few black people in America there's a very small cohort of black people in America who remember slavery days. They were not born in those days. So why is that still an issue? Like, why can't black people just move past this and do better? Why can't they take care of their neighborhoods? You know the usual responses.
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
I mean, the government has been very instrumental in perpetuating some of these issues around race. maybe not more recently, maybe so. I mean, again, it's for people to understand. I think they might want to take my family policy class, and I can definitely give them a good opportunity, give them an opportunity to learn over time what's going on. But people have to be open to a discussion. I find for myself, if I talk to someone and they immediately go to some of the comments you just made, they're a lost cause for me. I'm not going to sit. I don't have time to convince you if you're not open to hearing a discussion around why that particular foundational part of America is real and has an impact on a certain group of people. Then I can't. There's nothing I can do for you. And I find for me, I have less patience for that discussion. Now that may be the wrong thing to do. When you're in my class, you have no choice. And that's the way you're going to earn your grade. But if you are someone who is open to a discussion, I'm happy to have it with you as long as you're open to realizing and understanding the role that America has played in justifying some of the practices around how you treat those who are marginalized and minoritized. And that goes for gender, that goes for sexuality, that goes for race. I know we're having more of a discussion on race, but also when it comes to men and race, black and male, that's when is a bigger issue for me because we put men in a space where they have power and prestige and agency. And so that space of being a man is partly the issue here because we discuss that men should have a certain position, and if they're not in that position, it's their fault. Where we give women, not saying this is right or wrong, is that we give women opportunity to not be successful, but also we place women in a second class space as well. And so black and male, black and female, white and woman, I mean, those are issues of reality. But for blackness is something that we don't want to have a discussion on. I think in the way that needs to have a really rich discussion on. I really applaud some people for those discussions, but there's very few of us who have those real discussions.
Thank you so much for that. And so I want to close our discussion by hopefully allowing you to maybe you could keep on your researcher hat in this, but keep on that same line of legacy. Can you talk about your father
Oh,
and
definitely.
how he influenced who you are today?
Well, unfortunately, my father died when I was 3, and I had a stepfather who my mother married. And he was a troubled man, to be honest. He had some issues with his own father that as I reflect on, had some effect on his parenting of me and my brothers. Now, I come from a family of 6. I have 2 sisters and 4 brothers, and one of my brothers just died last year. Another brother is a physics professor, and another brother is HIV positive, and also has been someone who's been in and out of prison. And I think when I reflect on his parenting of us, I can see why some of us did well in terms of our academics and why some of us didn't, and why my brother who died last year died at the age he did. And it's because I think that the legacy he had of his father not being involved and also being somewhat abusive, he carried that into my family, and my family with my brothers and my sister and my mother. But also I was very fortunate to have a very loving godfather. And my godfather was someone who I would visit often during the summers. I was like their child. As I reflect on that parenting, and I really model myself more after my godfather and some of my uncles. My father, I do reflect on, as my stepfather in particular. I do reflect on him in terms of his work ethic. He had a very strong work ethic, but he was not the most healthy person, for lack of a better word. And I learned from that too, as to not to do some things he did. And as a person myself, as I became a father, I really made sure I was mentally and physically in a better space to parent my own children. And my son just got married 4 weeks ago, and it was very touching
Congratulations.
to be a part of that, and to see him now being the man he is. Because believe me, I was shocked to hear he was getting married. That's a whole nother conversation. But it was also a reflection of seeing him as an adult in a different way. My wife and I reflect on that. We did a good job. We did a good job in that he's a healthy person, who's a loving person. And so I really think of that. I think some of that came a lot from my godfather, who was very instrumental in my life. And I really applaud him for it. And I thank him daily in my own prayers or my own meditation for what he's been able to do for me. And that's why I do the work I do, because I just don't want to perpetuate the legacy that black men are not good fathers and black men are not there for their children, because I know that's not true.
I want to reflect, just spend maybe a couple of seconds reflecting on that phrase that you said, yourself and your wife saying, we look at our children and we say we did a good job.
Mm.
Use that phrasing to look over your own history. So your father died when you were a really young kid, and you had a challenging relationship with your stepfather, but then there were also these multiple other father figures who were pouring into your life and influencing your life. When you look at that palette of fatherhood experiences, and you look at who you are today, and you look at how your son has turned out and is turning out, what does it mean to be able to say, to look at your son, to look at your children and say, we did a good job?
So, what does it mean to say we've done a good job? We've done a good
For you,
for me.
personal, in that
For
space in
me
your heart.
personally, it's. I mean, for me, the one thing I think about, because I'm trying not to start crying because I'm a big crier, and I reflect on what I said at his wedding. That he taught me how to love. He taught me how to think and be patient. He taught me how to be calm, because I come from a family where I was spanked a lot. And I don't know if the word is spank. I'm saying spank for the audience, so it doesn't get into.
I know the word. I think the audience knows the word.
But I was spanked an awful lot, and I was a good kid, and so I've always wondered, why was I spanked so much? And for my kids, I thought that I should go to that space where I should spank as well. But my wife never was spanked, and so we had to have a compromise of how to discipline our children. And so that's how I learned that there's a way to parent in a way that's more loving and thoughtful. And also for me, it was, I felt, I don't know if the word, I felt successful in that I raised a kid who was also loving. That was my biggest concern. I wasn't caring about him making a whole lot of money. I really want him to be someone who was concerned about society. And that's what he does as a job. He does work around mentoring youth and setting them up on internships. And also for me, the thing that I really valued in terms of raising my son and daughter is that it really helped me to reflect on what it means to be a contributor to the world. Like, what am I helping them to be, and how it helps me to be more relaxed that I've done my job of hoping that they'll make the world a better place and they'll be respectful of people in some kind of way. Because that was a big thing for me. They were not allowed to. They could argue, but they couldn't hit each other, because I wasn't tolerating that, because I think that violence perpetuates violence. But I don't know if that answers your question. But for me, I feel much more relaxed in that, and also at the same time, I fear for my children, because he's a black male, and there's no guarantee that he will. Like I have, I don't have a guarantee either that I'll be around the next day, because we don't value black maleness. But also for my daughter, I worry that she is she able to find a mate that's going to be caring and loving to her as she gets older. So I have some ambivalence as a parent who's raised a successful child, because that success also is that they are able to speak their mind, and people who speak their mind often are not put in a safe space. And I'm worried about that. And my daughter and son, they get it from the mother more than me. I'm gonna say this is the mother's fault. They really do let people know what they are. They are very big on that, and so that makes me worried, because some people may not be accepting of that independence that they bring, and their own agency and their own confidence, that I think is important to have.
Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate the personal reflection, but also the wealth of we haven't even scratched the surface.
No.
With regard to the wealth of knowledge that you bring, and the significant impact that you've had on this field and continue to have on this field. So thank you so much for spending this time with us. I know you could have been doing something else. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the invitation, and congratulations on all your awards. This is a wonderful podcast you put together, and I'm just so thankful for you being around. So thank you again.
I appreciate it. You've been listening to the Black Fatherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Alvin Thomas. I'm a clinical psychologist, researcher, and the director of the TriLab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's School of Human Ecology. Original music for our series was composed and performed by Micaiah De Silva. Our series producer is Joe Ruby. The podcast is supported by the School of Human Ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And you can follow me on Twitter at Dr_AT758. That's Dr_AT758. And on the web at thomaslab.humanecology.wisc.edu. Make sure to subscribe to the Black Fatherhood Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts.